Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. We are in the home stretch of our Monetize Your Glide app series. In the first video, we set up our Glide app in order to receive subscription information. In the last video, we set up our Pay Here link. And finally, in this third session, we're going to put it all together by automating the user payments so that their rows will go directly into the subscription sheet. Now we're building apps in Glide, which is a no-code tool, and I love no-code. And so for that reason, I'm using another no-code tool called Make.com, which is formerly Integromat. They have a really robust freemium version, and then if you really wanted to get more out of your experience, you can certainly upgrade to any of their plans. What I love about it most is that it's collaborative as well. So on any of their plans, you can invite other users in to help build your apps along with you. If you don't already have a Make account, go ahead and click right over here to get started, or you can click the link in the description below. Go ahead and pause the video now, make that happen, and then come on back. So Make.com is a platform that lets you automate anything, right? So you can specify the rules that when something happens in one app, then something else happens in a different app. So there's lots of different use cases, obviously, right? So for example, hey, if I post an image on my Instagram account, then also post it to my Facebook account, something like that. For our purposes, we're going to have it connect from Pay Here to Glide, right? So when something happens in Pay Here, then ultimately we want is something to happen in Glide, adding a new row to our subscription sheet or editing the row if they're upgrading their subscriptions, right? So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. I already have an account, so I'm going to sign into the Make platform. So right away, you're taken to your dashboard screen, and here's where you'll see all of your active scenarios and your usage. And the primary purpose of this screen is for you to create a new scenario. Before we do, we're actually going to create a data store first. So the data store is a database that lives inside of Make that you can access from any of your scenarios. And our purpose for using the data store is to store the row ID of the subscriptions that are going to be created and tie that to the customer ID that gets created in Pay Here. So that way we can leverage those two values moving forward through our automation. So to create a new data store, you'll simply select Data Stores from the left-hand menu, and then from here you'll click on the Add Data Store from the top right-hand corner. You'll give your data store a name. In this case, it could be Pay Here and Glide. And for data structure, you have to choose a data structure, or you can add your own. We really only need to store 2 or 3 values here in our data store. So we're going to click on Add, and we can either specify the data structure, or we can create it ones ourselves from scratch. The data structure name, this isn't really anything we really have to worry about. It can be whatever you want it to be. Basically what we're going to do is we're storing the row ID and the customer ID. So we can just say user IDs, something like that maybe. And the specification, we're going to add 3 different items. So I'm going to click 1, 2, and 3. And the name of the first item is going to be the row ID. So that's going to be the row ID that gets created whenever a new subscription comes in. We also want to link that to the user's payment ID, just in case we want to leverage the payment ID section of Pay Here, and also the subscriber ID or subscription ID. Okay, so we have subscription ID, payment ID, and row ID. So these are all IDs that are tied to that user, which is why I'm calling it user IDs. All right, click on Save, and then Save again. And now you should have a data store called Pay Here and Glide that we can leverage in our scenario. So now that we've created our data store, let's actually go ahead and create our scenario. We're going to head back to our main screen, click the Create a New Scenario button in the top right corner, and now it's asking for a trigger. What's going to start this automation? Well, the trigger is going to be anything that's coming in from Pay Here, new payment, new subscription, something like that. So it's going to be a webhook that is called from the Pay Here side to trigger this automation. So we're going to click on the plus and select webhook as our trigger. So I'll type the word webhook, and it's the very first option at the top, and it's going to be a custom webhook. Okay, we have to add a new webhook. We'll click on Add, give it a name. This name could be something like New Pay Here Activity, and then hit Save. And what it does is it gives you your webhook URL. This is the URL that's going to get called from the Pay Here side and make that trigger in Make. So if you're unfamiliar with the terminology of a webhook, basically a webhook is a one-way call with information, right? So when Payhere does something, we want Payhere to call up Make and say, hey, here's all the information, and then we can use that information with our automation. All right, so I'm going to copy this URL, this address, to the clipboard, and now we have to head back to Payhere to tell Payhere that this is the webhook it should call. So I'll visit my Payhere page, go to my subscription link, go to the Advanced tab, scroll down, and you see there's a place for webhook URL. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in, click on Save Changes, and then head back to Integromat. And by Integromat, I mean Make. So you can see here that it's waiting for that data to come in. The only way to actually get the data is to go through with a payment. So here's what I like to do. I go back to my Glide app. I'm going to change my subscription amount to $1. That way, as I'm testing this out, I'm only paying $1 at a time, and I can always refund myself if I so choose. And then I'm going to copy the Payhere link in a new tab, paste that link, and then actually go through with the payment. All right, we see here that's $1 a month. Here's my information. That's great. I'm going to go through with a payment, and that payment is then going to trigger that webhook, which then calls up our Make scenario and provides all of that wonderful data into the scenario, which we'll take a look at in just a second. All right, let's head back to our Make scenario, and we should see that the data was successfully determined. Excellent. Hit OK. All right, now I have spent hours and hours and hours trying to craft the perfect Payhere to Glide Make scenario. So there's a method to my madness. Pause the video wherever you need. This might take a bit, so if you have a glass of water or if you have some food, go get some now. And that way you can be comfortable while we go through all of this. So the first thing we have to do is look at the information coming in, see who made that payment, and check to see, do they already have an active subscription in our Glide app? So to do that, we're going to check against the data store. So I'm going to add another module, and I'm going to add the data store. So we're going to search applications. You can search for data store, and then this icon should pop up, and you're going to select data store. And then the data store action is going to be the get a record. We're going to get any active records that already exist in our data store for that customer. So the customer key that we're looking for is the customer ID. So I'm going to click on the key here, and you see this is all the information that came in from Payhere. We have payment information, subscription information, customer information, and plan information. The key that we're going to leverage throughout this scenario is the customer ID. That's going to be the source of truth for our customer integration here. So I'm going to select the customer ID as our key. The data store is actually going to be our Payhere plus Glide, right? And then hit OK. All right, so then based upon whether or not it found a record here, then we're going to do a couple of things. If it didn't find a record, then we're going to create that record. If it already found a record, then we're going to update the record. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some branched logic. To do so in Make, we add a router. So in the green flow control section at the bottom, we're going to add a router. We're going to connect it to our data store. And when you click on the plus in the middle of our router, now we see we can have some branched logic here. All right, the first bit we're going to take a look at is creating a new record into our Glide app. All right, so I'm going to click on the plus, and the best way to add new data to your Glide app from some third party, like in this case Payhere, is to leverage Glide's API. If you have a Google Sheet or an Airtable as the back end of your Glide app, you could certainly add a row or to Airtable or add a row to Google Sheets directly through those modules. However, if you go that route, there's going to be a delay from the time that that row was created in Google Sheets or Airtable to the time it's reflected in the app. And that results in a lousy user experience, because when somebody goes to pay for the subscription, they don't want to have to wait 2 or 3 minutes in your app for that data to sync. So the best way to add in new information is through the Glide API. You get access to the Glide API when you have at least a pro subscription in Glide. So just like I mentioned in the last video, if you want to have the best user experience, you gotta go pro, right? You gotta spend money to make money here. So in order to talk directly to Glide tables and offer the best experience, we are going to use the HTTP module in Make. HTTP module is just do something on the web. In this case, we're going to make an API call. So I'm going to add another module here. I'm going to search for HTTP, and it's going to be this blue globe icon for the HTTP. And we're going to make a request. We're going to do something on the web. All right, so here we have some fields to fill out. It's at this point you can go back into your Glide app and get the Glide API. So I'm going to click on my Glide app, and you're going to find the sheet that we want to write to. In this case, it's going to be our subscription sheet. When you right-click, you should see it says Show API. Again, you have to have at least a Pro app in order to make this happen. So if you don't already have a Pro app, pause the video, upgrade your app, and then come on back. All right. Welcome back. So we're going to show API. You see there's a variety of things we can do. We can add a new row, we can edit the row, or we can delete the row. If you have a business tier or above, you can actually get all rows, you can fetch all the rows. We're not going to leverage that for this tutorial though. What we want is to add a row. So I'm going to click on the copy icon on the add a row feature. This is going to copy all of this, this curl data that we're going to put into our make scenario. All right, so from here, the way I like to set up our make scenario is to throw everything into the body and then divvy things up. So the body type here is going to be raw, and the content type is JSON. That's always going to be the case. And then in the request content box, this is where I paste the code I just copied from Glide. Command V to paste. Okay, immediately you can see, hey, these are all of our column names that will exist in our subscription sheet. Isn't that awesome? So now we have to take this information and put it into the correct spots. The first thing I like to do is just kind of clean up the data a little bit. So in this request content, it's looking for the data it should send to Glide. In this case, it's going to be everything after this data raw tag. And it's looking for curly bracket to curly bracket, which means we don't need these quotes. So I'm going to delete the quote, the very last quote in this string here, and get rid of the quote before the curly bracket. And then everything before the curly bracket here, I'm going to cut. Okay, we're going to tackle this little bit in just a minute. All right, I'm going to scroll back up to the top. And now it's looking for a URL. I'm going to go ahead and paste what I just cut. And we can see that this is the URL that it's looking to cut, or it's looking to call. We also see that we're requesting a post, and there's two different headers, the content type and the authorization. All right, we see here data raw as well. Now we already defined data raw here in the body type, so we can get rid of that. We also see that content type is application JSON. We already defined that here as well, so we can get rid of that line altogether. So that leaves us with the URL, the method, and the authorization. So the method here is post, and the URL is this URL. So I'm going to get rid of everything before the URL, and again, we don't need the quote. And then everything after the quote here, I'm going to cut. That leaves us with just the URL that it's calling. Again, the method was post, we're putting something somewhere, right? And then we had that one header, the authorization header. So I'm going to add a header, and then under the name, I'm going to paste. And we can see that the header name is authorization, and the value is bearer, and then your bearer ID. So the name is just the word authorization. We don't need the colon or the space. And the value is this bearer, and then your ID. I'm going to cut, and under value, I'm going to paste. Okay. So this is what the format should look like. Now, your bearer ID is a random string of characters. Never give out or expose that information because that's like the keys to your Glide house. Anybody who has that bearer token can write things to your Glide tables on your behalf. So never expose that information. In this video, you'll see that the word here for me is secret, but really it should be a random string of characters. All right, before we save all of this, we're going to scroll down and then start filling out this information. Now, here's what I learned about Payhere. Whenever somebody creates a new subscription in Payhere, two webhooks get called, and they happen back to back. There is a subscription created call, and there is a new payment call. They're separate, and there's no way to predict which one comes first. Does the subscription information come first, or does the payment information come first? There's no way to determine that. So we have to go through our scenario here just knowing that we can't rely on which order things happen. And payment information does not live in that subscription call, and subscription information does not live in the payment call. Okay, so in this case, for when we're going to create a new row here in Glide app, we're not going to worry about any of the payment or subscription info yet. We're only going to put in the customer information into our Glide app at first. Okay, that means that we're only worried about the name, the email, and the customer ID. The plan is also a value that will always exist in either of those two calls, the payment or the subscription. So we can leave that one as well. But all of these other key value pairs, we don't have to worry about, which means we can delete them from this data list. All right, so subscriber ID, payment ID, subscribed on, last payment, next payment, we can trash. Okay, the amount, the payment status, subscription status, and the plan level, we can trash. Okay, so now it leaves us with 4 key value pairs. The very last key value pair cannot have a comma at the end. Okay, so comma, 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 no comma. All right, so if you're familiar with JSON structures, this should look very familiar to you. If you're not familiar with a JSON structure, which is what this is just how data is structured. We have this column values structure, and within that structure we have these key value pairs of the name, email, customer ID, and plan, and we're going to give it some values here that come from our webhook to make it dynamic. Okay, so for name, we're going to fill it in with the customer name. So I want to look for the customer information here. That's going to be the customer name. Okay, the email, I'll trash, and should be the customer email. The customer ID is the customer ID, and the plan lives under the plan section as the plan name. Okay, so now we have a complete HTTP call. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now what we have so far is something's happening in Payhere. We're checking to see, does that customer already exist? If not, we're going to add that row to Glide. In the future, we need to update that row in Glide, right, for all subsequent payments and that kind of thing. The only way we can edit a row in Glide from the make side is to know what the row ID is for that user. So that's why we're leveraging this data store, is to store the row ID that gets created. With this HTTP call, the response is the row ID, which means we can grab the row ID from this request and store it in our data store. Now that response of the row ID is formatted in JSON. So we need to parse that value and extract it so that way we can store it in our data store. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add a new module. In order to extract that value, that row ID, we need to parse JSON. So I'm going to search for JSON. You see that there's a JSON module we can leverage. And the transformer here is going to be parse JSON. I'm going to attach it to our HTTP. And now we have to tell make what that data structure should be. So we're going to add a new data structure, and we're going to call it Glide row ID. Okay. And we're going to tell what the structure should be. So we're going to generate some sample data. The sample data is going to be a JSON structure. It's just one line of JSON. So to format JSON, you do curly brackets. With inside of the curly brackets, you do your key value pair. That's double quotes, colon, double quotes. Okay. The key in this case is going to be the row capital ID. So lowercase row capital ID. That's the way that Glide is formatting it. And the value here is going to be the actual row ID value. Since we're just trying to determine what the structure is, we can type anything we want inside of these double quotes. I'll just type the word ID and then click on generate. And we see that it created a new name here called row ID and it's text. All right, I'm going to hit save. And the JSON string we're looking for here is going to be found in this data that is going to appear as a response when we go to create that new row. So we're going to choose our HTTP data as the JSON string. Hit OK. Okay, and the last thing we're going to do here is update our data store with that row ID. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add another module. It's going to be our data store. And since this is the first time that the user exists, we're going to add a record. The data store is our Payhere plus Glide. And we see here that here's our the different fields that we have. Ignore plan name. We have row ID, subscription ID, and payment ID. And the key we're looking for here, again, is our customer ID. So the key, we're going to scroll down for customer ID. And when a new customer ID comes in, we're going to add the row ID that we parsed in this parse JSON module. And that's it. Again, subscription ID and last payment ID, we're not going to tackle quite yet. Hit OK. All right, so what we have so far, something happens in Payhere. We're going to check to see if the subscription already exists. If it doesn't, we're going to create a new row and then save the row ID that got created to our data store and tie it to our customer ID. So then that way, next time, if that same customer creates another payment, it will find that value in the data store and then choose the other route. Okay. Now it's here that we need to specify that filter, right? We only want it creating a new row in Glide if that record doesn't exist. So to create a filter, we're going to click on the wrench between the router and our HTTP module, and then click set up a filter. Okay, we're going to call the label here new Glide row. And the condition is going to be where the row ID does not exist. Okay, so when the customer ID comes in, it's going to check the data store for that customer ID. If it didn't already write one yet, if it's a brand new customer, that means that this data store action over here never took place, which means the customer ID never took place, which means the row ID does not exist. And so if the row ID does not exist, it will take on that first condition. Okay, that means our second condition down here is going to be where the row ID does exist. In this case, we're going to update Glide. Hit OK. Let's go ahead and save our work. All right. Now remember, whenever a new subscription comes in, two calls are made. We have a payment call and a subscription call, and we can't tell which one comes first. So we can't rely on the information coming in from the webhook in order to update our Glide row with the subscription and the payment information. So what we need to do is look up that information from Payhere. So whenever there's a new subscription, it doesn't matter which one comes first, the subscription or the payment. It's just going to create the user. And then immediately following, we're going to have a new call, whether it's the subscription or the payment, that will then follow this second route. Okay. And again, whether it's the subscription or the payment information, what's the same is that the customer ID will be in that payload. So we're going to use that customer ID to search on Payhere's side to grab that customer information and bring it into Make. So Payhere does have an API that allows us to get customer information based on their ID. So we're going to leverage this Payhere API call. We see that it's a get API call. That's the method. And then here's the URL we're going to call. And all it requires is the application JSON and an authorization bearer token. We don't have to include any other data beyond that. All right, so that means we need to set up a new HTTP module. So back in Make, we're going to click on this plus for the second route. We're going to choose HTTP. We're going to make a request. And the method is going to be a get call this time. Body type is still raw JSON. Okay. And the URL is going to be this URL here in the example. So we're going to take that and copy and then paste it over here in the URL section. The only thing is that we want to replace this colon ID with the customer ID that we want to search. So we're going to delete that that colon ID and replace it with the customer ID tag that's coming in from our webhook. All right, so that's going to make a call to Payhere to say, hey, look up this customer in Payhere. Now, it did require an authorization, again, with that bearer and the API call. So again, I'm just going to copy this, come to Make, add a header. The name is authorization, and the value is bearer, and then Payhere's bearer token. You can find your Payhere bearer token by going to Payhere, going to Settings, Integrations, and when you scroll down, you'll see your live API key in this box. I'm going to copy this API key, come back to Make, and paste it after the word bearer. All right, I've collapsed my headers here so you can't see the full bearer token just for privacy's sake. All right, so now this HTTP module is almost set up. The last thing we have to do is parse our response. If you don't parse your response, you have to use a transform JSON like we did earlier in order to extract values. In this case, if you parse the response, then we can move on with the scenario without having to parse the JSON. We can just call it like we do with our webhook or our data store or likewise. All right, so this one is done. We'll hit OK. Now we're ready to update the row in Glide with whatever information it found in this make a request. Now this make request is going to result in all of the subscriptions and all of the payments that are made for this user for our app. So what we need to do is extract just their latest, just their most recent subscription and just their most recent payment. So we have to look at the data coming in and filter it to just that last value. We can do that with some of Make's tools here. Now, in order to leverage those tools, we actually have to make that request so we can configure it later. So if we right-click on this HTTP make a request, we can run this module only. And here you see it's waiting for the customer ID. We can find our customer ID back in Payhere. Remember, we already ran it once to configure our webhook, which means our customer ID has been created on the Payhere side. So if we go to Payhere, go to your dashboard, and then go to customers. On the customers screen, you should see that one of those customers is you. By hovering over or clicking on your name, you should see in the URL what your customer ID is. So we can leverage this customer ID moving forward when we're doing our testing. So I'm going to right click and copy our customer ID, come back to Make, and paste in our ID here. Hit OK. And now you see it's going to run that scenario and get my customer information. If I click on the 1 here, we should see that our status code is 200, which means it was run successfully. If you don't have a 200 code here, go back and take a look to make sure you didn't have any typos in your HTTP module. And we can see that the output is this data. If I were to drill down, right, we see our customer data, right? We see all of our subscription data and look how many subscriptions I have over all the testing I've done and all the payments I've done as part of testing, right? And ultimately, we want is to grab the very last payment in this series and record it in our Glide app. Now, also what I've learned about Payhere is that it's possible that the very last number, this 74 here, might not be the most recent payment. It might have pushed that most recent payment somewhere else in this array. So what we have to do is not only get the last item or the most recent item, but we have to, in order to determine that, we have to sort this data coming in here. So we're going to do that with some tools. And we have to do that for the subscriptions and for our payments. Let's start with the payments. I'm going to go ahead and add a new tool, and we're going to set a variable. We're going to connect it to our HTTP module. Let's rename this tool to be get last payment. Hit OK. Actually, let's copy that first, then hit OK. And under variable name, we can just say last payment. All right. The lifetime is going to be 1 cycle, and the variable value here is going to be a function or a formula that we're going to create here. Okay. Ultimately, what we want is the very last data set of our payments. So we have a nice little structure we can use if we go to our array section in Make called last. All right. So it's going to return the last element of an array. In this case, the very last payment that was made. But in order to determine what the last payment was, we have to sort our payments by the payment ID. Now, it doesn't matter where it's at in the array. From what I've learned, Payhere will always increment the payment IDs as they come in. So the highest or the maximum payment ID, the highest number is the most recent. So we can sort those lists in ascending order. Okay, so I'm doing a last, and then within the last, I'm doing a sort, and within the sort, we're going to determine what the array is. All right, so now it's looking for an array. So here's where we can choose the array that we ran from the HTTP module. I'm going to click on the little star over here, and we're going to choose our payment array. So I'm going to drill down here. This is the make a request under data, and then payments. I'm going to click on payments. And we know that this is an array because it says payments and then it has the square brackets. Excuse me. Okay. Now we want to sort these payments in ascending order. So we're going to do a semicolon. That's what make wants. The order is going to be ascending, in this case, ASC, if we were to read through this block of text here. Okay. And after that, we're going to sort payments in ascending order by the ID value. So another semicolon and then type ID. Okay, because that's going to be the payment ID. All right, then hit OK. All right, so if I were to run through this again, which we'll do in just a second, it will grab the last payment information that came in. We have to do the same thing with subscriptions. Luckily, all we have to do is just right click on this and clone it. Let's attach it and rename it to say, instead of get last payment, let me get last subscription. Okay, we'll just copy this word subscription, hit OK. All right, let's configure it by clicking into it. Instead of last payment as the variable name, we'll say last subscription. And for the variable value, we'll get rid of our payments array and instead choose our subscriptions array. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. All right, let's hit OK. So far, we are going to update Glide. We're going to find all the customer information, and we're going to get the last payment that was made and the last subscription information that was made. So then that way we can use these values to write back to Glide. Now it's here we're going to add another router. So I'm going to click on Tools, add a router, and attach it. The reason why we're adding another router, another branch logic here, is because it's only going to take this first path when it's creating a brand new row. But every other time when it finds that customer ID, it's going to try to do something and update it. Now, the payment information that's coming in from Payhere could be a new payment. It could be a brand new subscription overall, right? It could also be a cancellation or if a payment is failed. So we want to account for the cancellations and the failed payments as well. Ultimately, what we want is to update our Glide app with that most recent information. And based upon what payment information is coming into this router, we need to then do something different or update something different on Glide side. Now, to update Glide, we're going to do another make a request to Glide, but we're not going to do an add row. Instead, we're going to do an update row. We're going to do a set column action. So we're going to add another HTTP module, make a request. Let's attach it to our router. And now let's configure this HTTP module to update our Glide row. In order to fill out this information, we have to grab this set column API code from our Glide app. So let's head back to our Glide app. Under our subscription sheet, again, we're going to right click and do show API, and we're going to copy the code under the set column action. So I'm going to copy, come back to our make scenario, and then start setting this up. Again, method is going to be a post. Body type is raw, content type JSON, request content, right click and paste. All right, let's close this down so we can scroll down. There we go. And we are going to, again, remove that last quote. And we only want curly bracket to curly bracket, which means everything before that curly bracket after data raw, we can right click and cut. And you see here that the kind is now set columns in row, not add row. Okay, we'll tackle this information in just a second. Let's scroll up. Okay, URL, let's paste. Again, we're only going to have this URL that's after the request post, which we already defined here. So we can delete everything before HTTPS. Let's delete all the information after the URL. Again, we already defined the application JSON. We already defined data raw. All we need is the authorization and your Glide bearer ID again. So I'm going to just cut the authorization name and delete everything except for the URL here. In the headers, we're going to add that authorization and again, our bearer ID. And again, for me, it's just going to be secret, but for you, it's going to be that ID key. All right, let's scroll down and configure this bottom section. Now, the only way that we can configure this bottom section is if we run our scenario again, because we have to get the values from this last payment and get last subscription. And there's no great way to do that except for creating another payment. So I'm going to hit OK. And when I run this payment, I don't want this module to run quite yet. So I'm actually going to unlink it from my router temporarily. I'm going to save. Now, before we run this scenario again, in order to grab that information, we should do some levels of cleanup here. So we're actually going to clear anything that's in our data store. We're also going to clear any subscriptions that we have currently created in Payhere, and also make sure that our Glide app is clear as well, which it should already be. So if I go to our Glide app and go to the subscriptions, that should already be clear. If we go to our Payhere and go to our dashboard, and then subscriptions, we should cancel all subscriptions that currently exist for our user just by hitting cancel. I'm going to do that real fast. Okay, all my subscriptions have been canceled. And then we should also clear out our data store. So in our make scenario, we can click on our data store, click on browse. And then we should see if there's any records in our data store, we're going to click on them and delete them. And then we can close. Now, it's possible that when you go to run once, it'll say something like process existing. If so, close down real fast and clear out your queue. To do that, you can right click on your webhooks module, click on show queue. Actually, before you do that, let's save, save our work. Okay, right click on your webhook module, click on show queue, and anything that's in your queue, you can select and delete. Right? Just navigate back in your browser to your scenario. And let's go ahead and run once. Okay, so now we have to create a new payment. And when we create a new payment, we should see that it's going to take the first route to create the row and glide, and then create the second route in order to get the last payment and last subscription information. Let's test that out. So in our Glide app, let's go to our promo screen, grab our Pay Here link, paste it in a new tab, and complete a payment. You should see here that it's going to follow both routes one at a time. All right, so it should take the first route to create that row and glide. There we go. All right. So our data store now has some information in it. And in our Glide app, we should now see our subscriptions in there with a row ID. That row ID got saved to the data store in Make. It's got our name, email, and customer ID, and that's it. Also the plan, I guess. And if we run it again, hit run once, it'll be that second call. Whether it's the subscription or the payment information, it doesn't matter. What should happen is that it's going to follow the second path, get the customer information, and then update our get last and get last subscription here. So I'm going to run once, process existing, and it followed the second path. All right, so now we should be able to configure our HTTP column. And what we're interested in doing is updating anything related to payments and subscription. So if I click on customer ID, right, we now see all of this great information that's coming in from the last subscription and the last payment. See that? Okay, now we want to update just subscription and payment information. The name, the email, the customer ID, all of that should be the same, right? So we can actually go through and trash the name, the email, and the customer ID lines. Okay. Again, we're not worried about plan level. That's from a different thing altogether. You should have something that looks like this. Okay, so the subscriber ID is going to be in that last subscription ID. So I'm going to trash and click ID. The payment ID will be in the last payment ID. Subscribed on will be the last subscription, and then where it says last or created at. Okay. Last payment is going to be the last payment created at. Okay. Now for next payment, you might be able to leverage this next charge at. That information should be in there at under the last subscription. So we can click on next charge at. I have found that this works like 99% of the time. However, if you want it to work 100% of the time, which you could always do if it's a monthly subscription, is you can just type the words in here, next month. And when the word next month hits that date time column that we created in Glide, it'll actually convert the words next month into a date that will be 1 month after the this timestamp. Completely up to you. So next month, or you can choose under the subscription, next charge at. Now the plan should not have changed, but if you want to rewrite the plan here, you can get that from the webhook itself under the plan name. So plan name. All right, let's go back up. All right, the amount is going to be under the last payment. Okay, and that's going to be the amount in cents. Now we probably want this in dollars, so we should divide this value by 100 because I don't believe just the word amount is in there. No, I think it's just amount in cents. Okay, so we'll click on amount in cents, but we should wrap it within, or we should divide it by 100, right? So we can do this. In the amount section here, we can click on the gear, right? And get some parentheses. Or let's delete the parenthesis and add it after the fact. Yeah, that works. Okay. Amount in cents. And then they have math tools here where we can divide by 100. So that'll give us the amount in dollars. Okay, let's head back to the star. All right, payment status. That'll be under the last payment and then status. Possible statuses are failed or success, and then subscription status. Possible statuses are trialing, if you're offering trialing, active, or canceled. So that'll be under the last subscription status. right, the last thing we need here is the row ID. This tells Glide which row to update. So we're going to trash row ID. Okay. And we're going to replace it with what it found in the data store. So the data store row ID. And we see that this row ID here, this I8B, matched the row ID in my Glide table. Okay, so that all looks good. Hit OK. After we make this request to update Glide, we can actually rename this update Glide. Okay, then we should also update our data store. So we're going to attach a data store module, and we're going to update a record. And the data store we're going to update is this Payhere plus Glide. The key, again, is our customer ID. So that's customer ID. We're going to insert missing records. Yes. Overwrite existing arrays. Sure. And we don't need to update our row ID. That's already set in stone, or the plan name. We only need to update our subscription ID and our last payment ID. So the subscription ID is going to be under our get last subscription, and then ID. And the last payment ID will be under the get last payment, and then ID. Hit OK. So whenever a new subscription comes in, or a new payment comes in, or a cancellation comes in, it's going to follow this route. Okay, we're almost done with this scenario. The very last thing we have to do is set up this router here. Now, it should only update our Glide and insert all of the customer information here when it's an active or a successful payment. We don't want to give users access to our app if the payment failed, right? So on this router, we're going to set up a filter to say if successful payment, which means the condition is going to be when the webhook event, see how it says subscription created. If it's a failed payment, it'll say payment.failed. So where the event doesn't contain case insensitive failed. Okay, hit OK. So as long as it's a successful payment, it'll update Glide. And we can add a router here with the reverse. So failed payment. Condition is where the event contains case insensitive failed. Hit OK. And then here's where you can set up what you want to happen if there's a failed payment. Maybe it's send an email out to the user saying, hey, sorry, your payment was declined. Please go into your customer portal and update your credit card information, or something like that. I'll let you set up what that does, but typically you can click in here, search for email, and then you can use any of the fields that are coming in from the webhook to customize that email with their first name and so forth and say, hey, please update your payment information on the Payhere portal. And you can give them a link to the Payhere portal, which I'll show you in just a minute. All right, so I'll let you set up that at some point here. All right, but otherwise, we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and save our work. And let's test out our app. So to do so, I'm going to clear out our Payhere subscriptions again. I'm going to leave our row in our Glide app. I'm also going to leave the value in our data store. So really all it should do is update the next payment that we do here with new information. So I'm going to go ahead and clear out Payhere and then run the payment again. Click the subscribe button, head back to make, which I already had the process running, and we should see that it takes the second path. All right, something happened. It didn't take this filter. Oh, apparently my filter says does not exist. It needs to exist. Okay, let's try that again. Subscribe. We should see that it follows this second path. There you go. Boom, 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 boom. So apparently it failed here. It didn't update Glide because I told the router to where it contains failed. So I had to switch it to does not contain failed. Let me try it again. Here we go. Boom, boom. It hit and hit. And now we should see in our subscription sheet that all of our information populated. Look at that. So now we have an active customer ID, subscriber ID, payment ID, which we can all leverage for other purposes in our bonus videos, so stay tuned for those. We see subscribed on, last payment, next payment. Those all came through as well, along with the plan and the amount and the statuses for both the payment and the subscription status. So the last thing to do here in our make scenario is to give it a name and save your work, and then turn your scheduling on. That way, all future requests that you do will automatically follow these scenarios without you having to run once. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is just making sure that all of this logic actually impacts our app. So if I were to go back to our video courses Glide app and go to the users section, we can see that the relation to the active subscription column that we created back in our first video is actually filled out because it's matching my email to the if active user subscription, right? And then because this relation to active subscription column is filled out, all of the logic of visibility conditions and so forth are actually working in my app, right? The subscribe now tab is hidden. If I were to go to the courses tab, you can see that the premium tab is now visible, right? And I should be able to access the content of this course. Look at that. All right, so the only thing left to do is to allow our users to cancel their plan in case they no longer want to have premium access. There's a variety of ways we can do that. The simplest method is just giving your users a link to Payhere's customer portal in order to allow them to cancel for themselves. So I like to house that information inside of the profile sheet. So I'm going to go to the user's profile and create a little section right here that allows them to see their plan. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new container on this screen. And this container will only be visible if they have an active plan. So we can set the visibility condition of this container to only show up when the relation to active subscription is not empty. All right, inside of this container, we can include some information about the actual plan that they've subscribed to. Let's go ahead and add it to a data grid component. So I'm going to drag a data grid inside of the container. And this data grid is going to display the relation to active subscription. All right. Now let's fill out some values here. I'm going to trash these and then re-add them later. All right, so the first item that we're going to display is maybe the membership name. So this will be the value of membership name, which I don't think we have quite yet. So let's go ahead. Oh, wait, we do. Never mind. That's going to be the plan. All right, so we see that the plan is monthly subscription. Let's go ahead and retitle this with a capital letter. We don't need the row numbers on the left-hand side here. Let's get rid of the row markers. That's great. All right, then we can add an item of the last payment. So the value will be the last payment. Okay, and we can add another value here of the next payment. Maybe we say renews on. And then finally, we can add the amount. And the value will be the amount. If we wanted to format this in dollars, we can go ahead and edit this number column at some point there. All right, now we don't want our users to come in here and edit any of this information. So under the options section, we can remove search. And under actions, we can remove the ability to add and edit. So now it's only view only, which is nice. But let's allow our users to cancel their plan if they want. So we're going to add an advanced action. And we're going to add a title bar action. And the title bar action is going to be manage subscription. And all we're going to do here is open up a link for our users. So the action will be open link. And the link we're going to navigate them to is Payhere's customer portal link. So for the URL, we'll make it a custom URL. And the portal URL is app.payhere.co/customers. All right, so then from here, they can click on Manage Subscription. It'll open up in a new tab. It might ask them for their email address and then send them a magic link to sign in. And then here you can see they have access to their payment history as well as their subscriptions. You see, they also have the ability to update their card. So maybe you point your users to this URL as part of the make scenario if a payment fails. You can say, hey, please update your card information at, and then give them this URL here as well. And you can see that if they were to cancel their subscription, it would run the make scenario and cancel their plan. The last little bit of logic you might want to do here is in their subscription sheet. Right now, we only have it set to be if the next payment is in the future, that means they have an active subscription. But maybe if they cancel their plan, you want to cancel their access right away. If so, all you'd have to do is add a new case here to where subscription status is, or if subscription status is canceled or includes the word cancel, because I'm not sure if it's with 2 L's or 1. If it includes cancel, then nothing. So that way, if they cancel their subscription, their email address won't appear here. You might also want to prevent them from adding a new row to Glide if they have a failed payment. So we can add a case to say if the payment status includes fail, then nothing as well. Completely up to you as to how you want to arrange that information here. Otherwise, you're going to give them to the end of the month at least, even if they cancel their plan now, to have access to your app. Oh, all right, we did it. We made this really complex make scenario that's going to be foolproof in terms of mitigating whether the subscription comes in first, the payments come in first, and we're using some really nice logic to call up Payhere's API, doing things that you probably didn't think that you were able to do before, but it's going to make a really nice user experience. Now, the solution presented in this 3-part series should be all you need in order to get yourself up and running with subscriptions, but if you have more complicated situations or scenarios about your app, maybe you're offering multi-tier subscriptions, or you want them to have an annual versus a monthly plan, stay tuned for some follow-up bonus videos where I'll go into detail about some of those specific scenarios. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to me at Twitter @rpetito. And as always, thanks for watching.